If you think about the place that's furthest from the center of calmness, most would think about the workplace, typically a high stress environment with not many tools to find your way to inner peace, shall we say. But what if you had a tool that would bring you closer to the center of calmness? Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Center of Calmness. Tonight, we're super blessed to have Gordon Corsetti with us. Welcome, Gordon.
Well, thank you for having me, DK. It's a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to have you with us. So how are things, if I may ask, where you're at in Georgia?
Things are going well. I've said we have one of the great Georgia falls where it's 65, 70 degrees for 3 months, and so we're just waiting for the winter when it becomes crushingly cold and ice all over again. We don't see that again for a little while. So we've been lucky with really good weather, which is great because I've been outside a good bit the last few months. But things are good. Family's healthy. All I can really ask for there.
That's great. So you seem quite calm, and it seems that the waves of the election, the economy, COVID-19, perhaps you've managed to navigate those without too much impact.
I appreciate you saying that. I certainly have my ups and downs with things. I think the fortunate thing with what I get to do with my work with mental agility and the kind of weird bit of public speaking that is now all virtual is that I constantly get to check in with myself on a personal level for kind of what I'm trying to do professionally and with helping others. So that bit does help me stay centered, stay calm, and then I'd use a host of regular techniques. But I also track my mood multiple times throughout the day. I've been doing that for the better part of 2 years now, and the last 2 months has been the highest average that I've had in terms of positive mood relative to negative mood in the past year. So so far things are good on my front. Granted, everything else seems to be absolutely insane.
Right.
But I'm surfing as best I can.
Yeah, that's great. And it's very interesting. I have not heard anyone mention tracking mood before. So, the thing that came to mind immediately when you said that was actually the scale, right? Folks talk about managing weight by keeping track of it, and that's an extremely simple and extremely effective methodology. Can I ask maybe the backstory behind how you arrived at that kind of a discipline, and can you share a bit of your journey that got you to this point where you're aware and you're present in the moment well enough to actually do that kind of mood tracking?
Be happy to. So I'm a depressive. I live with major depressive disorder, and I prefer the term depressive. I think it's a slightly more positive spin on it. And I also live with generalized anxiety disorder. And in my early and mid 20s, I attempted suicide by a couple of different means. Had several hospitalizations, had several intensive outpatient programs through hospitals. And most recently, I had electroconvulsive therapy last November for another mental breakdown that I had the medication and the therapies that I were all taking had reached had lesser and less efficacy over time. And so they said, well, you seem to be a candidate for ECT because we think you have treatment-resistant depression. Okay. And had about 9, 10, 11 sessions of ECT, came out of that and finished up a 90-day treatment protocol at a place called Skyland Trail in downtown Atlanta. And that has all of that has led me to I've been an athlete all of my life. I've been a referee for the past 15 years in lacrosse at the high school and collegiate levels, working all over the country, and fortunate to work with a lot of great players, a lot of great coaches, a lot of great referees, my colleagues. And I've been able to apply several lessons that I've learned on the field to stay calm in an insanely stressful environment with loud noises, and loud music, and pissed off people, and a lot of pressure. And I've been working without me really knowing it for my mental health. It's been working more off the field. And as I've been blogging and speaking to schools and organizations with mental agility, it's been my way to kind of take all of these things that I've learned in 15 odd years of therapy in a lot of different modalities and say, hey, this isn't just for the folks like me who are mentally ill. These are human problems at the end of the day. And I like to think that I have a fairly good gift of language that I can take those concepts and stuff that I've picked up from hospitals, from different teachers, from different therapists and psychiatrists, and distill them into a good way for folks who either may not want to be in therapy or are just general lay folks who don't know much about dealing with the thoughts that they have on a daily basis. So that's where I come from. That's a fairly truncated way of throwing my story in there, but that's how I arrive at what I do now.
Right, and that's huge, and that's such a depth of experience. May I ask, at the beginning, you said 15 years of therapy. I know that, and I hesitate to even recount the term mentally ill, because in my mind, we're all human, right? We all have minds, and it's really a continuum, a spectrum of where we land, and each one of us have individual challenges. And some of those are labeled as mentally ill and others are not, but they're still challenges all the same. But 15 years ago, you decided to go for therapy. What was it at that time where you realized that I've got to take some proactive steps to make a change in whatever was happening at the moment?
It was shortly after, I want to say my freshman year, or in my freshman year of college. So it's also a very common time for individuals. They usually schools, hospitals see a spike in both admissions for different types of mental illness and also suicide attempts. See a spike in that August, September of the new school year for anybody, young people who are going out typically to first time out in the world, really, and first time that they've got all the responsibility, and first time that they're away from their usual social network and support network, right? In some cases that can be good. In the majority of cases, that's a gigantic change that really nobody is prepared for. And if you, like myself, have an underlying condition that might will make that experience not as good as it could be. That's where I was at. So I wound up coming home from school, I think at the end of that year, and my parents had found a very talented therapist nearby, and I'd wound up seeing her for probably the better part of 4 or 5 years before I wound up moving to Baltimore for work, and then I found another good therapist up there. So I'm always, if I have to go someplace new, one of the things, I'll see my doctor, I'll find my new dentist, and then I'll find my new eye doctor and also my new therapist if I need to. But it's one of those things of, I've talked to plenty of my friends who, they ask me kind of, hey, what do you think about this? Or why should I go see somebody? And I'm like, look, I'm not going to tell you not to, because I've had pretty good experiences. Right. Yes, you'll run into therapists that you just don't agree with or work with, and I'm like, if that's the case, then say I'd like a referral, and they will happily refer you, because that's how that industry works. But I approaching things from a sports metaphor, because I do speak to a lot of student athletes, and I kickboxed and did jiu-jitsu all through my teenage years. I look at, for me, battling my own mind is I very much have to look at my depression, my anxiety, my suicidal ideation as an opponent. I have to. That's how it works for me. And I look at having a therapist as having a corner man, effectively, of somebody who is not in the fight, who can identify things that you're doing or it's doing, so that you can increase your chances of becoming victorious, and can also, in between rounds, calm you the heck down.
Yeah, to keep the stress from building up, at least excessively. I'm sure that it does build up as a matter of natural course. And that was going to be my next question: is what role does the therapist play? And you've outlined that quite clearly, right? The advocate, the person in your corner, man or woman in your corner, coaching, encouraging, as well as perhaps providing a third party perspective when things do come up, to put things in the right perspective and characterize the events and situations as they really are, or at least providing another perspective as to how they really are. That's very cool. And do you find that a lot of the things that you've struggled with over this time that other student athletes are struggling with as they kind of go through their rites of passage, their freshman years, their progression through the sports teams and high performance and high stress, high expectation environments?
Yes, and it's unfortunately also been trending downward in age with, again, I work with lacrosse, which is still a fairly, for better or for worse, affluent sport for most families across the country, and there's this trending expectation of this is, if you're really good at lacrosse, you can get into the Ivy Leagues and all this kind of stuff, and so that pressure gets put on kids in 5th grade and just keeps on getting magnified over time. So we're seeing that, unfortunately, at a younger age level, and I've been coaching youth lacrosse for the better part of 20 years now, and the now parental expectations on these kids is ridiculous. And when I speak to high schoolers, then they're adding to going into college. Now the college folks are, if they're having success in the lacrosse field, they're worried about success in the job. So it's all these kind of like these, stepping stones in their life where there's going to be significant amounts of change. I find most people are ill prepared for them because the conversation is never on the now. Or the short term, it's always on this big long term thing. Like the thing that I say, and I love my parents, Mary Jo and Lou, very much. And one thing I critique them on when I speak to high school students, especially, is I say, my parents, I love them to death. They never taught me how to be content. That's not a skill that is in Western cultures, much less American culture, to be content. The idea is to always be, it's everyone's got to be a shark in swimming or you'll die. And I'm like, that's just not, we're not sharks. Sorry. It's just not.
Right. Just not.
I can appreciate that mentality in certain respects. Certainly in the sports world, you need to have that kind of quote unquote killer instinct at times. But I do think I could have avoided a significant amount of pain in my life had I been able to learn at a younger age how to slow down and just appreciate what I'm doing now. And that what I'm doing now might not be anything. So
I suppose, right? Yeah. Of course, it's all about being in the moment and making the most of what we have, and perhaps not looking too far forward. Although at the same time, there's a balance between goal setting and just being in the. I think of the Eastern versus Western, as you mentioned, where Western is highly goal and expectations oriented and setting very lofty objectives, and the Eastern is more of, well, just be content to just be, right. It's a bit of a paradox, perhaps, but we all find our way. I am curious because you have so much experience in refereeing, coaching, as well as in the sports yourself. Do you find this higher level of pressure is generating any higher performance per se?
No, I haven't. And that's the interesting, because so I've gone all over the country for referee clinics, for coaching clinics, for tournaments, so round robins, all sorts of things. And it hasn't resulted in, it may result in an individual's overall performance. And that is more of a question of what does that person's family or team have to invest in them monetarily. That's a financial thing on that front. Sorry, that's just what it is.
Of course.
And as far as, again, I'm speaking of lacrosse as a team sport. In 15 years, the good teams are still the good teams. They're always still the underdogs that can kind of come up there and punch upwards. But I haven't seen a dramatic change in, say, the quality of play at any level that you would think of because of all these, kids coming up and saying because it's so individually focused. It's not team focused. And in a team sport, I don't care how many individuals you have, an average, highly connected team is going to beat the team with 5 studs. It just is.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Because it's a lot more about the interaction and the cooperative play necessarily than it is any individual superstar carrying the whole team on their shoulders, I suppose. Right.
Absolutely.
That completely makes sense. Though it's interesting that there's an opportunity in such ease in applying pressure to individuals through family, through friends, and through the team peer pressure itself or through the coach, but yet the same level of pressure is not applied to the team.
It's a very curious bit on that, and that is, I think, again, a consequence of high school teams and youth teams being coached with individuals who are trying to model professional and collegiate coaches, the folks that they see on that bit. And that's just not a model that works at younger age levels. It just isn't. You don't have the resources to pool into that. And those kids aren't as engaged in the activity as somebody who is, playing at Clemson or Notre Dame, or in my case, the Ravens, right? So yeah. It's folks with different goals in that point. But the weird thing is to take maybe a personal story on this end is I hated playing lacrosse when I was coming up. I did it because I was fairly good at it. I was a Division III athlete. That was kind of my ceiling. But I could never enjoy the game because it didn't matter how well the team did. If I made one mistake, I was done for the day. I hated everything, and I hated myself more than that. And the weird thing is I found refereeing where you're never right. And somehow I've been doing that for 15 years and loving every second of it. But the shift in mentality of that, of, you're expected to be this high performer as a player and to consistently deliver for your team in critical situations. That's a different kind of pressure when you're a referee. And I've got games tomorrow that I'm going to be in. Everyone expects you to screw up in some regard. We have a joke that we say referees are supposed to start off perfect and improve from there.
Right.
And
perfectionism to a T, right?
Exactly. So it's and I'm a natural perfectionist, and so it gives me an opportunity to kind of sharpen my mental tools against this whetstone of stressful experiences. And so I try to seek out in my refereeing and in a couple other avenues of my life some things that are inherently challenging for me personally. That gives me an opportunity to try out new techniques and skills.
Absolutely. So I noticed the team dynamics and the personal versus team performance versus the referee. Actually, all of these elements have a lot of application in the workplace, and we're eventually getting to the key concept that I'm really looking forward to hearing about. How have you found the transferability of the skills that you're learning on the field or working in the field in work environments?
There's a tremendous. I wish everybody would referee. Well, I don't care if it's refereeing like little kid soccer games, just to have the experience of conducting, 20 odd other people and surfing the emotions of a game, and dealing with extremes of behavior and extremes of verbal commentary from total strangers or people right?
Right.
I know a good amount of folks in my lacrosse community, so it's the ability to stand in the center of the storm, in the middle of the hurricane, and be able to move yourself as the hurricane moves as well. So you're always in that center space. That takes a lot of work and a lot of practice. That's why we lose a lot of referees. Typically the first to third year guys and girls will not stay past year 3, which is why we heavily invest in our mentorship programs to be able to bring them along, because those first 3 years are rough because it's such an unusual environment. And it's one of the things of just like, I'd never be on an airplane and have the pilot hit turbulence and start banging on the cockpit door saying I can fly the plane better. Right. But that's the thing that always happens in a lacrosse game, or any game, is everyone's just like, I can see that just fine. Meanwhile, Jug and replay on the DVR or whatever. You got all these resources I just don't have in that exact moment. The solace of that is that I do whether it's breathing exercises or other ways to stay present. I'm always trying to do things 100%. For the benefit of the players. It is no longer about me, even though I'm the one performing this service, this action as a referee. My officiating philosophy is not internal, it's external. It's to give the players the best experience possible. And if that means I have to throw a whole bunch of flags because they're playing unsafely and they need to be reined in a little bit, then that's what I do. Or no flags on the other side because they've earned the right for me to get out of their way because they are playing the game as it's meant to be played. It's just being able to work with people, to read people. And as somebody like myself who had tremendously bad social anxiety, I don't think I said more than 500 words a year when I was in high school to anybody outside of like answering teachers' questions. I was not social at all. And I have to now engage with coaches who may be pissed off and may be frustrated. Or somebody coming to my car in a parking lot. And those are very stressful situations. So being able to do that for 1.5, 2 hours a day, that translates so much to being able to have greater interpersonal skills in the workplace, but also to be able to recognize when things are about to hit the fan. And one of my favorite comedians is always just like, there are some people who their life experiences know when stuff's about to hit the fan, they step to the side of the fan. That's officiating. And
exactly.
You learn how to see what signs are coming, and then okay, now we can deal with this problem, but we're not going to get hit in the face with it.
the one move that's the most important, right? That little sidestep that takes you out of the flow, if you will, of whatever wrath is coming.
Well, that's why I call what I do. My website is mentallyagile.com, and my organization is Mental Agility. And I used to kickbox, and my kickboxing instructor, Stevie B, when he was sparring with 16-year-old me, and he would punch me in the face, and I would just kind of stand there and just like, because I wanted to get the right perfect punch in. Be like, "Are you ever going to move?" And then he'd slap me again, and I'm like, "Oh, I can do that." And he's like, "Yeah, you can." So it's this ability mentally to bob and weave, to shift direction, to attack from a different angle, to defend when appropriate, to cover up when you need to. Ways in which that you can kind of step outside of your thinking patterns that are fairly ingrained, and see if there isn't a better way of doing things.
Absolutely. And now, before we run out of time completely, I have to ask the subject that we decided to talk about. We're almost out of time. We would like to talk to at least visit that, the work shutdown ritual, as you call it. I'd love to hear that about that technique and kind of how it fits in this continuum of mental agility and the context that you've been sharing so much with us today.
Certainly, I'll be happy to break that down for you. Probably one of the things I'll throw in a book recommendation here is I think it's Carl Sagan's daughter. I think her first name might be Susan, but she recently published a book called "For Small Creatures Such as We," and it talks about all the ways in which human beings, regardless of culture or where they live, where they came up in, we are hardwired to respond to rituals for changing of the seasons or marks, birthdays, things, marks of common things in human life, that if we can ritualize certain behaviors, that has a deep resonating effect in our minds. That is just a powerful thing we can key into. And several years ago, I was looking for ways to improve my time management. I was working at an office. I was also freelancing. I was refereeing. I had a lot of different things, a lot of balls in the air, so to speak. And I took an 8-hour online course on time management through lynda.com. And the last thing that the presenter talked about was this work shutdown ritual. And I was like, ooh, what is this? Cool. And the idea behind this is to create a solid break between your work life and your personal life, right? And not meaning your commute. I'm talking like in the office, wherever you're at, or in our cases, our home offices now, which makes it a little harder. But the idea is to have a ritual that you do at the end of every day. And then I would add on to that a little bigger ritual on Fridays. I can talk about that as well. But I'll talk you through what I would do at the office. So I had a laptop hooked up to a bigger screen. I would type that if I needed to work. I could bring the laptop with me. But at the end of every work day, I'd power down the laptop, close it, open a desk drawer, put it in the desk drawer, close and lock the desk drawer. And then sitting at my desk, I'd take a couple of deep breaths, and then I'd say, I'm done for the day. And then I'd get up and I'd leave. And what that does, if you keep on habituating that, is it creates what's known as I've come across as a threshold effect, or just a threshold boundary effect in the mind, where you by intentionally crossing through or over a threshold, you put your mind into a new environment. That's why, if you've ever had, or your listeners have ever had the experience of going into a room and they totally forget why they're there, that's the threshold effect happening. It's just your brain realizing you're in a new environment. It's trying to catalog threats and what's going on in that. And so we can take advantage of that with this small ritual and say, we're going to say that this is work and it's over, and we're going to step over work now, and we're going to go on with the rest of our lives. And for me, I've been doing that for 3.5, 4 years now. And I added a thing for that wound up, because again, I'm big on getting more connected with individuals, is on Fridays, I would take my last 30 minutes of the day, and I would write out 3 letters to colleagues or friends and mail them out through the company mail. And then I'd shut my computer down and do that. And then, the plus was 2 weeks later, I get a note from somebody like, I can't believe you sent me a letter. And it was just a nice way to slow down Monday through Thursday. And then on Friday, it was a nice way to kind of just really disengage from the hustle and bustle of the regular week, and be like, right, I need to be present for, my family when I get home, and for the things I want to do this weekend, whatever that may be. I have to leave work where it is, right? And so I do this so I don't carry it with me, and it becomes easier over time. If I'm like, oh, I got to worry about that project, I'm like, okay, I can write that down on a note card, or I can send it to me in an email, and it's out of my head for the next, however long my weekend is, kind of thing. So that's the work shutdown ritual in a nutshell. I've got links to that and several other working professional tips on my website as well if folks are interested.
That's great. And that'd be a perfect segue for me to show that information for everybody. And what's nice is it's very simple, and I wish I would have bought this website some years ago, right? mentallyagile.com.
Mm-hmm.
That is just so simple, right? So it's Gordon's site here at mentallyagile.com. So a lot of tips and tricks there for folks, particularly working professionals. And just as a final question for you, Gordon, what benefits have you seen from applying this work shutdown ritual every day for the last 3 or 4 years?
Just a greater sense of relaxation and also a greater sense of doneness. That could be like whether or not like work never ends. That was the thing that my dad always told me coming up. He's like, there's always going to be Monday, right? But we got to feel like we got to add more hours into Friday or whatever else day we got. It's just, you know what? It's being able to choose. We're done for this right now. Let me go recharge and hit this when I'm fresh.
That's huge. Doneness, right? Because like you said, we never feel like we're completely there until we look back and realize perhaps we always were, right? The joy is actually a lot more in the journey than it is any destination we might imagine. And then you've added on particularly on Fridays, right, the human connection aspect, where you're taking a deliberate, intentional action to reach out to folks that you may never interface with or interact with for weeks at a time, and suddenly you're reaching out to them, and they're seeing and appreciating that gesture of really a gratitude for that connection you have with them. That's huge as well.
Mm-hmm.
Gordon, you've shared so much with us today. I really appreciate it. So very valuable, and I appreciate you sharing your story as well. I know the audience will really benefit from what you've shared, as well as the value provided, the tips and techniques. And I hope and trust that we'll reach out to you for more information when they need that.
Would love that. Anyone's welcome to get in touch with me anytime. And once again, thank you very much for having me on the show. And you asked some questions I hadn't hit before, especially that teamwork question or team skill question. I'd never gotten that before. Now I'm going to start asking coaches that.
All right, sounds good. Well, glad you enjoyed, and thanks again. It's super valuable for you to join us today here at the Center of Calmness.
Have a good one.
You too. I'm DK Warner.